Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om.
We will sing Let Us Go Back to Our Own Abode, number 9.
Om
Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Mahedhi Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Our subject today is the nature of the self. And so, happy Father's Day. So what better subject to discuss on Father's Day than the nature of the self? Because even the idea of the self, that I am a father, or I am a mother, or I am a son or a daughter, is connected with the notion of the self. Why should we know the nature of the self? We go to school, we study different subjects. Sometimes it's not easy to answer that question as well. Why should we go to school? But at the very least, we know that with some amount of basic education, it helps us to make ourselves useful in this world, find a source of livelihood, and survive at the very least. But is it possible to survive without knowing the nature of the self? And the answer is yes. In fact, most of us are surviving pretty okay without knowing the nature of the self really. Now, what Vedanta points out is not knowing the nature of the self is not so much a problem as knowing the nature of the self wrongly. So right now, it's not that simply we are ignorant of who we are. In fact, none of us thinks that we are ignorant of who we are. If we were asked the question, who are you? We always have some answer to give. It's very difficult. In fact, if someone were to ask you, who are you? And you were to say, I don't know, they will think you are crazy. Although that would be a truly honest answer from a spiritual standpoint. So, the nature of the self is important. How important is knowing the nature of the self compared to knowing a bunch of other things in this world? While knowing the nature of the self may not seem to bring immediate benefits in some ways. For instance, if your computer needs fixing, you know the nature of the self, you still won't be able to fix your computer. And so some of the problems that we face may still remain, but a more underlying problem may be solved. And the underlying problem is that we do find some amount of fulfillment in the things that we do, from the objects, people, places in this world. It does bring some happiness, it does bring some amount of contentment, but it's never full, it's never enough. At no point in life do we feel, I'm completely fulfilled, I don't want or seek anything in life. There's always something remaining. And so, what we might call lasting fulfillment doesn't seem to come from anything that this world has to offer us. And so the world is nothing but, in some ways, the non-self. I mean, what is the world really? Where does the world begin? And in a general way, we can say that if this is me, everything other than me is a part of this world. Although technically, of course, then we can go on to say, well, the body is a part of the world and so on. But generally, what I say, if this is me, everything other than me is an object of my perception. So the world is really everything that is not the self. So knowing and understanding the nature of not self does bring some immediate benefits and definitely has great utility, but it does not seem to bring us lasting fulfillment. At least so far, it hasn't done so to anyone. Not knowing the nature of the self or wrongly understanding the nature of the self creates a problem. As I said, most of us, when we think about the self, what we think about immediately is the sense of I, the I sense, which is really the ego. And because this ego is the one which gives me the sense of I mistake it to be the self. And because I cling to it so strongly, because most of us don't have any doubt that that which makes me gives me the feeling of I is who I am, that the Buddha thought it most convenient or thought it most effective to break that attachment to this false self by just saying there is no self. In other words, what you think of as self now is really not yourself. And so that's what the Buddha meant when he said, you are not the self. Because what we think of self now is the sense of I. And mistaking who I really am for the sense of I is the cause of all selfishness, all wickedness, jealousy, envy, all the negativities that we find in life are the result of associating myself with this sense of I, which gets related to my body, mind, ego, my thoughts, feelings, hopes, and ambitions. If we look at life, the third reason why knowing the nature of the self is important is that all of our life, our thinking, our doing, our relationships, everything is related to the self. And not knowing the self, in a sense, becomes not knowing our own life. And if something goes wrong, as it will, as it has in the lives of all of us, nothing seems to go perfectly. If anyone tells you that up to this point, everything in their life has gone perfectly, don't believe them. It doesn't happen. So things are going to go wrong. As they say about that Murphy's Law, if something can go wrong, it will. Now, if we don't know how to deal with it, then we are in trouble. And as I mentioned, give the example of a computer. If your computer goes wrong, you may know how to operate on a computer. You may be very good at it. But if something goes wrong and you don't know at all anything about the self of the computer, which is really what's going on really inside it, then you are in trouble. Now, everyone doesn't have to be a great computer expert. But even if you can be, to however little a measure, kind of a tech support to your own self, that every little time you won't have to call up your computer guy, so to speak, it does bring some amount of freedom. It's extremely liberating. If something goes wrong and you know how to fix it, it does make you feel free. What about if something goes wrong with our own life and we don't know how to fix it? Can we become our own tech support as far as the Atman, the spirit, is concerned? And finally, if the experience of the enlightened ones of the past is to be believed, and if what the books say is to be believed, then knowing the nature of the self, the real self, not merely intellectually, but experiencing it, brings us everything that we seek in life. And what all of us seek in life, no matter we might express it in different ways, is we want to be happy, not just for a short amount of time. We want to be happy all the time, and we don't want any pain and suffering. And what enlightenment means, the way it gets defined, is it's reaching that state, that being, in which everything that we want will be ours forever, and everything that we don't want will go away from us. Sometimes in theistic language, that gets expressed in terms of being eternally in heaven with the Lord, or never being anywhere in the other place. And spiritually, it just says, if you know your true self, then everything that we want will become ours. So that's the motivation behind knowing the nature of the true self. Now, in order to kind of get a glimpse of how, because we have spoken on this subject several times before, so what I wanted to do this morning, the next few minutes, is to give you a taste of how some of the Vedanta texts have addressed this topic of knowing the nature of the self. And that's the handout you have in your hands now. Yeah, a handout will be in the hands, of course. It has the 10 verses of the first chapter of the book Panchadashi. Now, there is a typo there. You'll find right in the beginning. Please correct your own copies. It's been put as Panchikaranam. So then it should be Panchadashi. A few years ago, we had Wednesday, our scripture classes were held on Panchadashi, and it went on for several years. And so this is a small section of that. So the first 2 verses are a form of salutation in all these traditional texts. Now, this book is estimated to be approximately about 600 to 700 years old. And in all these traditional texts of Vedanta, the beginning is always done with a salutation. The idea behind salutation is to recognize with gratitude the sources from which we have learned. So this is a gratitude to one's own teacher and to the divine, directly or indirectly. It's also a form of prayer, because remembering God and one's own teacher at the beginning of any new activity or project is to seek their blessing so that this whole project may go unhindered without any obstacles. And so the first verse, I'll just read the Sanskrit quickly, and then there is, of course, the translation. Namah Shri Shankarananda Guru Padambu Janmane Savilasa Mahamoha Graha Grasaika Karmane. Salutations to the lotus feet of my Guru, Sri Shankarananda, whose only mission is to destroy the monster of the great delusion, Maya, along with its effects. Tatpadam Buruhadvandva Seva Nirmala Chetasam Sukhabodhaya Tatvasya Vivekoyam Vidhiyate. The discerning of the truth, the viveka of the truth, is begun for the easy understanding of those whose hearts have become pure by serving the lotus feet of the Guru. Now, the word viveka, translated here as discernment. Viveka literally means separation. Only when we separate the non-essential from the essential will we then be able to grasp the essential. So, viveka or discernment is an important quality necessary in spiritual life. Verse 3. Shabdasparshadayo vedya vaichitryat jagare prithak tato vibhakta tat samvit aikarupyan bhidyate. In the waking state, the objects of perception, such as sound, touch, etc., differ from each other because of their own special traits, but the consciousness of these is distinct from the objects. Being one, it is not different. Very briefly, the subject of consciousness is much in the news currently, and it's also has become a center of debate. There are primarily two schools of thought. One is that consciousness emerged at some point in the course of evolution. And the other school of thought is that consciousness is independent of the material world, that consciousness is eternal. Consciousness is non-material, and because it is non-material, it does not have to follow the laws of matter. So this is two distinct schools. Consciousness as a product of matter, and hence essentially material, and consciousness as completely non-material. All material sciences will see consciousness as material, as something that is a product of the activity in the brain. So, yes, I don't want to go into too details about it, neither do I know much details about it, but it's essentially a product of the brain. It's a product. Whereas, according to Vedanta, consciousness is eternal. So it's not that the brain produces consciousness, but it's that the consciousness is the prime force. Force is not really a good term, but really it's very difficult to give any term at all. Well, consciousness is the prime reason why knowledge becomes possible. Now, to give a very quick example, for instance, now, the way we use the terms consciousness and knowledge in English can be distinguished. For instance, now, let's say there is an object. There is this piano here, and my eyes are closed. I open my eyes and I see the piano. It just seems like, well, that's so instantaneous. It's possible to break this up, that I open my eyes and the first thing I become is conscious of an object in front. And then the second thing is, I know that that object is a piano. So the first knowledge, if you like, is the knowledge of the presence of something. And that's what we call conscious, being conscious of something. And then the next question is, what is that something that I'm conscious of? So in some ways, we can say the way the word consciousness is used in English is consciousness is becoming aware of presence of something. And then what we say knowledge is then the who, why, what, when of that thing. So consciousness, we could say, gives us a more generic knowledge of isness, of presence, of existence. And the details are what we call by the term knowledge. Now, in Sanskrit, the word jnana, for instance, really covers both. So consciousness, we can understand, is a prerequisite for knowledge. If I'm not conscious of something, I will have no knowledge of it. For instance, when I am asleep, I am not conscious of the waking world. I have no knowledge of the waking world. In order for me to be conscious of something, therefore, in order for me to have a knowledge of something, I would need consciousness. So no consciousness, no knowledge, no experience. What this verse that we just read points out is that while I can be conscious of a bunch of other objects, I'm conscious of a piano, I'm conscious of the carpet, I'm conscious of everyone here, I'm conscious of the hall, I'm conscious of light. Now, these objects are different. Every one of them has their own distinctness, not only different in form and name, quality, and many different things. But the consciousness which perceives these objects, is aware of this object, is not different. So it's like, suppose this room were dark, completely dark, and I have a flashlight in my hand. I can use the flashlight to then point it at the piano. I see that wherever I point that flashlight, I'll be able to see those objects. Now, because I have knowledge of those different objects, doesn't mean that the flashlight I use is a different one for each object. So just like the same light can illuminate different objects, is the same consciousness that illuminates or illumines or makes me aware of different objects in my waking state. So that's the first thing to recognize, that consciousness and the objects that consciousness illuminates are two different things. So it's with the light of the sun that we are able to see everything. But the light of the sun is different from everything, but it helps us see everything. So that is what he said. First thing, in the waking state, the objects that we see are different, but the consciousness itself, which makes those objects visible, perceivable to me, the consciousness itself is same. Then next verse. Tatha swapne travedyam tu nastiram jagare sthiram tadbhedo tayastayo samvit eka rupana bhidyate. The same is the case in the dream state. In dreams, the perceived objects don't last. In the waking state, they do. Thus, the objects in the two states can be differentiated, but the consciousness in the two states is one and not different. Again, we can distinguish between the objects that we see in dream and the objects that we see in the waking state. in our own little way of understanding, we can see that somehow the objects in the waking state seem to be more persistent. And as they sometimes say, every morning you wake up, you see the same old world. But every night you sleep, you see a different dream. So dream objects somehow seem to be more perishable, more temporary than the objects in this world, which is why we are able to then dismiss dreams as unreal, while this world somehow seems to be real. So while it's possible to distinguish the objects in the dream from the objects in the waking state, the consciousness which perceives those objects in the dream and the consciousness which perceives the objects in the waking state is one and the same. Verse 5. Suptothitasya saushupta tamo bodho bhavet smritihi sa chavabuddha vishaya avabuddham tat tada tamaha. It is through memory that a person awakened from sleep becomes conscious of ignorance in deep sleep. Memory is possible only of what is experienced. Obviously, that ignorance was experienced in deep sleep. We can ask a question. Do I have consciousness in deep sleep? We understand we have consciousness in the waking state, which is how I know what's going on. I have consciousness in the dream state, because if I were not conscious of the dream world, I wouldn't be able to see the dream world. So there is consciousness in the dream state as well. What about the deep sleep state? Am I conscious when I'm fast asleep? And the answer is yes. How do I know that I was conscious when I was fast asleep? Just by my experience when I wake up. Because when you have a good sleep, when you wake up, whether or not you say it, you know deep down, I slept so well. Always, if you have really slept well, you're going to feel rested, you're going to feel happy. And you're going to say, I slept so well, I had no idea what was going on. Maybe there was thunder and lightning last night, but you slept so well, you had no idea about it. So you can wake up and say, I had no idea because I slept so well. Now, when I make these statements that I feel so happy, I slept so well, I had no idea, I'm not making things up. I'm only narrating my experience. So there was someone experiencing in that state of deep sleep, that joy that was experienced, that rest that was experienced, the ignorance that was experienced, that I didn't know anything. So there was consciousness present even in the state of deep sleep. Now, as you can guess, what the next verse will point out is the consciousness of different objects that we have in the waking state, the consciousness of the different objects that we see in the dream state, and the consciousness that is present in the deep sleep state. They are all one and the same. The consciousness itself does not change. Verse 6. Sabodho vishayad bhinno nabodhat swapna bodhavat evam sthanatrayepyeka samvittat taddinantare. This consciousness of ignorance in deep sleep is distinct from its object, that is ignorance, but not from consciousness in the dream and waking states. Just as the consciousness in dream is not different from the consciousness in the waking state. In this way, in all the three states in a day, consciousness is one. Likewise, there is no difference between the consciousness of one day and that of any other day. The idea is to show that while the objects of our knowledge differ in the three states, the objects of our knowledge differ from one day to the next, our experiences in life will change. The kind of experiences we had when we were little children and when we were teenagers and so on. At different stages in life, we will have different experiences, we will see different things, we will know different things, but the consciousness remains constant in spite of all these external changes that are occurring. Verse 7. Masabda yuga kalpeshu gata gamyeshvane katha nodeti nastyamattyeka samvidesha swayam prabha. Similarly, the consciousness in the months, years, ages, and creation cycles of past and future is the same. Consciousness has no beginning and no end. It is self-revealing. And that's why I said there is these two schools of thought. If you believe that consciousness appeared at some point in the course of evolution, then it had some beginning somewhere. But then if something has a beginning, then that's also going to have an end. The Vedantic worldview is consciousness has no beginning and no end. It's truly birthless and deathless. Everything else, which is a product of matter, will follow the laws of matter. And one of the essential characteristics of matter is what is composition? Is particles of matter coming together and forming any object. It's essentially atoms, molecules, and so on. It comes together. Now, decomposition is whatever force that kept these particles together is dissipated, these particles return to their source. And that's why we say a human body will ultimately dust returning to dust. At the end of the day, at the end of the life, in the end of life, it's just going to be a heap of dust or a heap of ashes. The body, not the consciousness. Now, if I identify myself with the body, then that's going to be my end. And that one of the reasons we are so afraid of death, one of the reasons it's not a very pleasant topic, is because I think when the body is destroyed, I am destroyed. But the body is not consciousness. The body is conscious as long as consciousness is in the body. Now, when do we say a person is dead? That doesn't mean the body just disappears. The body is still there. But the body becomes non-functional. We see the body is not conscious, which itself, if nothing else, would show that consciousness is separate from the body. If the two were inseparable, then as long as the body is there should be consciousness. You could never have had an unconscious body. So, at least at the physical level, it's not that difficult to understand the difference between consciousness and the body. The mind can be a little tricky because the mind is something that's not so visible. We won't go into that now, except to point out that according to the Vedanta texts, the mind is often called the subtle body. In other words, it is also material, but the matter is very fine, very sukshma. That is why sometimes called sukshma sharira. It's so fine, so that you can't see it. And we know that things don't always appear to be as they truly are. Well, as I pointed out earlier, even something that looks so solid, if I were to look at it through a powerful microscope, it's not going to appear so solid at all. I'm just going to see atoms and molecules and so on. Now, science so far at least has not been able to develop an instrument by which the mind can be seen. So if and when they are able to do it, if at all they are able to do it, then maybe they will be convinced that the mind is also material. But even before we need an instrument to see mind, just through inference, it's not very difficult to see the similarities between body and mind. In every respect, the body and mind are identical. The only difference is you can see the body, you cannot see the mind. Other than that, there is no difference at all. We know that if you feed your body well, the body will be healthy. You feed your mind well, the mind will be healthy. If you put junk in the body falls sick. You put junk in the mind falls sick. Both have their doctors. Both get tired. Everything that can happen to the body happens to the mind. The only difference is you can see the body, you cannot see the mind. Now, just because you cannot see something, it doesn't automatically become spiritual. When no one has seen an isolated electron, for instance, there's nothing terribly spiritual about an electron. So be able to see some things itself is not enough to mistake it to be the spirit. And so the Vedantic position is that both body and mind, both are material. One is subtle, the other is gross. But because they are both material, they are able to act and interact upon one another. And we know that. We know how the body and mind do things together. We know that if the body is greatly in pain, usually the mind will suffer. Or if the mind is in pain, usually it will have some effect on the body as well. Now it's possible for in spiritual practice, it's possible to de-link as much as possible the body and mind. So it's possible that the body may be suffering, but the mind can still be in bliss.
if that mind, instead of remaining completely absorbed in the body, if that same mind is diverted to something else, then it will not feel the pain. And sometimes you know that. Sometimes, for instance, if you have, say, a nagging headache and you have nothing to do, it's going to be painful. You're not going to be happy. But let's say you are reading a very interesting novel. Of course, most people don't read nowadays. So let's say you're watching a movie or seeing some interesting television program. And if it's really interesting, you can get so absorbed into watching that TV program. For the moment, at least, you won't feel the pain of the headache. The head is still, I mean, there is still something wrong there, but you won't feel it. So if I can divert the mind to something else, and spiritual life, of course, we know that what spiritual seekers try to do is they try to focus, use their mind and intellect to focus on a spiritual ideal. To that extent, they can deal with the physical infirmities in a better way. So the nature of the self, who am I? Am I the body? Am I the mind? Or am I this pure consciousness? And what Vedanta teachers have pointed out in many different ways is that every one of us is essentially that consciousness. A consciousness that is encased in the body and the mind. Consciousness which is not encased is infinite. But if you kind of limit it within the body and mind, it becomes a dwelling in the body and mind. That's why sometimes the word that gets used for the Atman is Dehi. Deha is the body. Dehi, according to Sanskrit grammar, is one who is inside the body. Now, in some sense, we understand that, I think most of that, let me put it this way. Usually our thinking is very muddled. Usually we are not very consistent in the way we think. And so while we might identify with all of this as me, but at some level we also know that I'm not really this, I'm someone inside this. Although we may not always apply it to our own selves. Think about it this way. If someone known to you or not known to you has passed away, and then you go to visit the family, and then maybe the funeral is not yet over, maybe the body is still there. So you see the body and you find everyone's weeping and saying, oh, this person has left us and gone. Now, obviously, if you are one with the body is still there. No one has left anybody. So even when someone is dead, even when the body is still present, we still feel someone has left me and gone somewhere. So at such times we acknowledge, although not very intellectually, that which someone who left me was not really this body. It's not like a part of this person has remained and a part has gone away. We don't think only 2/3 of the person has left, 1/3 is here. So, as I said, we don't think about it, analyze it this way, and it's usually not a good idea to do so also. But it's not a very clear thinking that we do. So the Vedantic idea is we are essentially this pure consciousness. The body and mind being parts of this world, being material, will follow the laws of matter. The body has a beginning, it will have an end. The mind also has a beginning, the mind will have an end. It's only the spirit, the Atman, which has no beginning and no end. And that's the message that Krishna returns to again and again, especially in the second chapter, when he says, you are birthless, you are deathless. So that is the idea here. Verse 8. Iyamatma paranandaha parapremaspadam yataha manabhuvam hi bhuyasam iti prematmani kshyate. The Atman is consciousness. Being the object of our greatest love, it is of the nature of infinite bliss. The love for the Atman manifests through the wish expressed in words like, may I never cease to be and may I always exist. Why is there always the resistance to our non-being? Or why is there always this great desire that I should always be? that my existence should never become non-existence. And what it shows is that there are things that we love in this life. Everyone loves things in life. But if we were to ask, what is it that you love most in life? And sometimes most of us would hesitate to say, I love myself most. Although one of our presidential candidates now seems to indulge that much. And it might seem a very kind of a selfish thing to just say, well, I love myself most. But think about it philosophically. That is, even the things that I love in life, whether it's people, places, things, food, whatever it is that I love it, why is it that I love them? Think about all the things that you love in life and ask yourself, why do I love them? And among the many different answers that you may get, one answer is certain, that object or that entity, that person, place, anything is somehow meaningful to me. It adds something to my life. If something were totally irrelevant to me, if something did not affect me in any way, I wouldn't care for it. And so, although it seems very grossly selfish to say, I just love myself, the reality is that everything that I love in life becomes the object of my love because that somehow adds some meaning to my life. And that is why when anything that I love is taken away from me, I'm deprived of something because that thing added something, some meaning to my life, had some purpose for my life. And when something that I love is taken away, I'm the one who is deprived, and that's why I feel sad. I mean, also sometimes think about it this way. We just spoke about death. Think about it this way: when someone dies, and we mourn and we grieve, sometimes it's helpful to ask, who are we mourning for? Who are we grieving for? Let's say someone has been suffering physically so much, it's so painful. Even when that person dies, people around are still mourning. Now, as far as that person is concerned, that person would be like probably the happiest person, just getting out of this suffering, painful body. For all we know, if that person has been a good person, if we believe in such thing as heaven, this person has gone to heaven and is with the Lord. I think it should be an occasion to rejoice. But no matter what, whether or not the person who is dead is in a better place, in a much happier place, in a much better circumstances, the rest of us still mourn. Now, why is it that if someone we love is in a better place, that we should be mourning? Again, as I said, none of us think about it none of us analyze it this way. But if you ever want to analyze it, we still have to say that whoever has gone brought something to my life, to me. And after the departure of that person, I'm deprived of that thing. So, while the love that I have in life for other things is definitely sincere, it's earnest, no questioning the authenticity of that love, it's still good to recognize that that love became possible, became meaningful, because that object of the love contributed something to me. Because we see, I mean, think about it this way. Every minute, every second, someone or the other is dying in this world. If death itself were to produce sorrow, we should be sorrowing, grieving, mourning every moment of our life. We don't. We mourn and grieve only for things that somehow added something to myself. Other than that, we don't. Which is why it is said, being the object of our greatest love. So not in a kind of a neurotic, self-obsessed sort of way. So in fact, the word for object in Sanskrit, the Sanskrit word for object is padartha. If you break it up, it really means pada, artha. the word meaning. Every object also adds some meaning to our life. If it didn't, the word artha, it would not be of any relevance to us. And that is why even when we speak about the world, we usually are speaking about the world that we know, and furthermore, the world that immediately affects us. If something is happening right now in some distant galaxy you have never even heard of, you are not even aware of, you don't care. But although it's still a part of the world. So again, my world is a much, much limited entity. It's a world that I have either read about or conceived of. And sometimes our world is even much, much limited. Usually, when we refer to the word world, it's usually, see, most of our lives, most of us usually move about in a limited circle of friends and people. There's a limited places we go to, the limited amount of work that we do. So these places, people, things that we tend to meet on a daily basis. And occasionally, the people, things and places you visit when you're on a vacation or you go on an outing. And sometimes some of the things, places you see, or read about or read on a television. That's all that our world is. So our world is a kind of a little bubble in which we move. And that which happens outside the bubble, that about which we are not even aware of, if you are not conscious of it, you have no knowledge of it. If you have no knowledge of it, you can neither rejoice at it nor grieve at it. So recognize that when we use the word world, it really means it's a pretty limited thing. It's only something that is related to me in some way. And that is why the self, the true self, is the object of our greatest love. And that is of infinite bliss. Verse 9. Tat prematmarthamanyatra naiva manyarthamatmanaha atastat paramam tena paramanandatatmanaha. Others are loved for the sake of the Atman, but the Atman is loved not for the sake of others. That is why the love for the Atman is the greatest. This proves that the Atman is of the nature of the highest bliss. This is again, we don't always analyze this way, but that's the reality. Why, suppose someone would say, I love tiramisu, for instance. Why do you love tiramisu? Wow, it's delicious, it's tasty, it makes me happy. So I have always some reason to give. Why do you love this? Why do you love that? You always have some reason to give. But then you say, why do you love yourself? You don't need any reason. I love myself because I am myself. And so it's a little bit also like this. Think about it this way. For instance now, in a dark room, a candle will give light. And with the help of the candle, we can see everything in that room. Now, in order to see the light of the candle, we don't need to bring another candle. That light illumines itself and also illumines other things in the world. Same way with the Atman. The Atman itself is the source of bliss. Because the Atman is the source of bliss, I don't need anything else to make the Atman happy. In fact, the goal, according to Vedanta, is often referred to in Sanskrit as moksha, means freedom. And freedom means independence, not being dependent on anything. So long as I depend on anything outside of myself to make me happy, I'm not free. And it's only the needs of the body and mind that I get fulfilled from the world outside. But for the Atman to be happy, the Atman is itself always happy. The problem is that this Atman is now forgotten itself, has covered itself with the body and mind, and therefore it feels I need things in order to be happy. You are familiar with that peace chant, Purnamadav Purnamidam. The idea is Purnam, that is essentially every one of us is complete in ourselves. We are whole, we are not a part. we are complete. Now, the first thing, when that which is complete, that which is whole forgets itself, what would someone who is complete, what would the ignorance of such a person would mean? Well, to think I am not complete. Because if I am complete and I know I'm complete, I have knowledge of myself. So if I'm infinite and I forget that I'm infinite, I'm going to think of myself as a limited being. The moment I make myself limited, I always see things outside of me. I seek the things outside of me to complete myself. That's how desire springs from ignorance. Where there is no ignorance, there is no desire. And that is why the Atman is the source of highest bliss, because the Atman itself is the source of bliss. It doesn't need anything else outside of itself. The Atman is complete, it's completely independent. And the last verse, 10. Itham satchit parananda atma yuktya tatha vidham param brahma tayos chaikyam shrutyanteshu padishyate. In this way, it has been shown through reasoning that the Atman is of the nature of being, consciousness, and bliss. This is how the word Satchidananda gets translated. The Supreme Brahman is also of the same nature. The identity of the two, Brahman and Atman, has been taught in the Upanishads. So, very briefly to summarize, as spiritual seekers, it's very essential that we develop a very healthy self-identity. And so even as we make an effort to get to know the things of this world, it's helpful, even if a few minutes in the morning or evening, to ask ourselves the question, who am I? And develop what Sri Ramakrishna called the ripe ego, the ripe I. The I attached to not the perishable, limited things of this world, but the I that is attached somehow to the spiritual ideal. In a theistic language, it would say, I am a child of God, I am a servant of God. That would be a ripe ego. More philosophically, I am the infinite spirit. That doesn't mean you deny the body and mind. Of course, there is a body and mind. Only a fool will deny it. If it's a matter of your experience, it's there. But experiencing the body and mind is different from saying, this is me. So, if we make conscious effort to see our body and mind as instruments, as great gifts that God has given us, and if we love God, we must make good use of these gifts. So abusing one's own body and mind is not the way to go. So looking upon the body and mind as an instrument and taking good care of our body and mind, but recognizing that we are different from it, and cultivating a healthy ego, that would be the first step. And cultivating a healthy, what does cultivating a healthy ego would mean? It would mean that reminding myself as often as I can of that healthy identity of myself. In other words, find creative ways in the course of the day to remind yourself, I'm a child of God, I'm a spiritual seeker. Now, it's easy to remember you're a spiritual seeker or you're a devotee when you're in a place of worship. The environment and the topic and the discussion and the ideas expressed here are very supportive of the idea that I'm a spiritual seeker, I'm a devotee. That's wonderful. When you now afterwards go out and you get your car out of the back lot and someone is blocking your car, can you still remember you're still a spiritual seeker, you're still a devotee? Because it's so easy to forget that time and then kind of return to being someone else. So cultivating a spiritual identity would mean, even in challenging circumstances, even when the environment, the place, the people around are not very supportive of your spiritual identity, you still, and that's an extremely courageous thing to do. When everyone around is supportive, of course it's easy to do it. When no one around is supportive, you still affirm that even in this situation, I'm still the spiritual seeker. That would be an act of courage. The more positive the identity we have, the more positive our thinking and actions will be. and the more healthy our relationships will be. So cultivating a positive self-identity is very helpful. It brings us real joy, real freedom. Relationships which are strong, which are stable, which are not fickle. There is one verse which is very Vedantic in some ways. It goes like this: Yatra astina mata na pita na bandhuhu bhrata pi yatra surujjanascha nadnyayate yatra dinanna ratrihi tatra atmadipam sharanam prapadye. In fact, one of the final teachings of the Buddha, when his disciples surrounded him before his passing, and they asked for his instruction. And one of the things that Buddha said was, be a light unto yourself. The self itself is this ever-shining, bright light. And so this is what the verse points out. I take refuge in the light of the self, the Atman, Atma-dipa, that's the word, which shines where there is no mother, no father, no friend, no brother, no beloved, and where there is neither day nor night. So with this, when you wake up in the morning and remind yourself of your spiritual identity, and with this identity, holding on to this identity, then we may look around the world, look around the people you own, your family, your friends, we'll see our own father, mother, friend, sister, brother, our own beloved, everything, all of them we'll see with a very different set of eyes. And when we see at all of these relationships, all of these things in our life, things that we love, people whom we love, with this understanding, with this deeper self-understanding, then all of these things acquire a greater stability, a greater meaning. It's then that we discover true love, true peace, and true contentment in life. So don't think that thinking of yourself as the Atman, somehow everything that is meaningful to me now will go away and I'm just kind of left stranded, just holding on to the Atman. That's not going to happen. Everything that is dear to me will become even dearer. I'll be able to love more, I'll be able to receive that love more and feel that love more, because the closer we go to the Spirit, the stronger the bond that we have with everything, because everything is nothing but the divine. So the closer we go to the divine, rather than separating ourselves from that and those whom we call our own, we'll in fact be even closer to them. And those who have tried to live spirituality, not just talk about it, not just discuss it, not just argue about it, but try to actually live according to these, have actually found a great truth in this. You don't have to become enlightened right away in order to experience this. However little an effort you make, however imperfect that effort may be, even an imperfect effort you will find will bring so much joy. And that joy then will strengthen your faith in your practice. And that joy will help you, guide you in intensifying your practice. That is what we learn from the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Swami Vivekananda. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu. Next Sunday, we'll have Antar Yoga, as we do every month. Besides music, meditation, prayer, we'll have readings by our members. And also a birthday celebration of everyone born in the month of June. So all June born are welcome. If any of your friends who have never come to the Vedanta Society but still were born in June, they are also welcome. And so that's what we'll do next Sunday. Antar Yoga. On Wednesday, we will continue with the study of the Gita. Present we're studying chapter 15. For those of you who couldn't attend the earlier talks, the chapter 14 Gita, the CDs are now available in the bookstore. And on Tuesday and Saturday, our Arati and meditation will also continue as usual. We'll conclude with a prayer now on page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.